Good morning. Good morning to those of you joining us from Europe, and good afternoon to those of you joining us from Asia. You're most welcome to this conference board webcast on the future of talent assessment. I'm Tara Murphy. I'm the Council Director for the Talent Acquisition Council in Europe. I'm also the Council Director for Strategic Workforce Planning and HR Operations, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I'd just like to go through some housekeeping issues in terms of today's webcast. We really hope that this will be an interactive session. So on the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you can see share your questions. So please ask those as they come up and we will bring them into the conversation. Anything left over, which there shouldn't be, but just in case, we'll follow up with email. In the middle of your screen, you see next to that box, you see something called download. So you can also download today's material and presentation. You can full screen at any point by pushing on the arrows in the middle of your top screen of your screen. At the end of the webcast, it will help us if you can do a very short evaluation. It'll take sort of 5 seconds, so please, thank you. And also this webcast is available on demand because we're conscious that this webcast is going through very late in the middle of the night for our North American colleagues. Before we go any further then, the final thing I wanted to talk about is the you can earn credits for today's webcast. What you need to do is you need to type your name, your email address, and specify which credit you're looking for. Again, that's in the bottom middle part of your screen. That's only available during the live webcast today, and you need to be logged on for the full webcast. Yeah, this is not available for the on-demand watching of this webcast. Okay, now it gets interesting. I'd like to introduce our panelists today, and we're delighted to bring a real mixture of perspectives from our European councils, our Asian councils, and then also somebody operating in the area of innovating technology in the talent acquisition, talent assessment space. So I'd like to introduce Julia Astrate to you. She is EMA Talent Acquisition and Programs Director for Vertiv, and she works on other projects as well. Julia is an industrial IO psychologist with 17 years experience in talent acquisition and organization development. She's worked in many companies, including Emerson. Vertiv is most passionate about talent assessment and making sure that it is a good experience for everyone. And Julia is a member of our Talent Assessment Council in Europe. I'm delighted to welcome Grace Carrison, Managing Director of APAC and Pymetrics. And Grace is shaking us up. Grace is, she's also the Vice President for Global Accounts for Pymetrics, with many years business experience. And I think that's really good, so that we don't sort of dive too deep. We need to go deep, but we also keep that business perspective. And Grace brings perspective of many years in experience in Cisco, Microsoft, LinkedIn, as well as this exciting company, Pymetrics. So welcome, Grace. And finally, Rajan Krishnakumar, welcome. Rajan is Head of Talent in Asia Pacific for MasterCard, and that's Head of Talent in the broadest sense. So really delighted, Rajan, to have you on the webcast today, and thanks to all of you for participating. Before we jump into our questions, what I'd like to do is to just maybe explain the context. This series of webcasts is about employee centricity. I think on this side of it, we're probably still looking at candidate centricity, but we are looking at the whole loop. And today is around how do we approach selecting. And talent acquisition, as we all know, is really being shaken up in terms of CEOs are saying recruiting and retaining talent is really one of their topmost priorities. And it's not just hiring externals. I think we're also looking at internals and how we select and assess those internally. Technology is shaking us up. People want a great experience. They want feedback. And finally, also skills in terms of the workforce are changing. So the challenges for assessment, are pretty big, but it's exciting. So with that, then I'd like to maybe start with our panelists to ask, can you please share a recent experience in the area of talent assessment and what you see as emerging trends? And maybe, Rajan, if we could start with you, that would be great. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon. I will actually I'll focus on the emerging trend. So if we look at what's happening in the external world, we are already seeing a big issue in terms of skill shortage. And it's actually going to become much more acute as we go through the next 5-10 years. And a lot of the organizations have already started shifting in terms of how do we actually upskill and reskill our internal talent. And that's a huge focus. And if you look at what is happening in this space today, only 37% of the organizations from a recent report actually know where their current skill gaps are. So that's where I think a lot of the investment and focus will kind of go in the next few years. And I think then assessment will play a key enabling role to make sure that in terms of how do we actually reskill and upskill the talent to be able to actually get ready for the future and make sure that all the organizations which are actually experiencing a very fast growth, how do they actually sustain and actually make sure that they are relevant in the future as well? And some of the other trends that probably we're seeing is organizations are very global and dispersed. So I think video-based assessments, or for that matter, we have a lot of specialist roles today. How we have to have custom-based assessments for some of these specialist areas becomes even more important and relevant. So those are some of the things very, very interesting and something that each and every organization will have to closely follow through in the coming years.
Right. I would, it's Grace here. So I'm going to add on to what Rajan has said and focus on emerging trends. So core to understanding what businesses require, not just for today, but in the future, is the role of assessments. Because with, the HR technologies that's available there is HR is investing heavily on people analytics, and really it's the insights and the data from the assessments that are an input to that. There is a requirement for assessments to be scalable and data-driven, and at the same time enables fairness in the way talent is assessed. And just as important is that human centricity for both the candidate and also the recruiters. So we're seeing that as a trend that technology in the HR world can offer. The other trend is, tying on to candidate experience is, especially for B2C companies like MasterCard, is the consumer experience shouldn't stop at the consumer experience. The candidate experience when they apply for a role, whether it's internal or external, should be consistent. To me, there's a trend that technology, especially in the multi-generation and the younger generation that's in the workforce in this region, is really critical to that. The third piece is as skills are evolving in a very fast pace. So, you'll see different types of researches that in the next 5 years, 75 million jobs will be eliminated, but 133 million will be new roles. And so how do you really assess, where talent needs to be, in the right role for them? And so there's now a recognition that it's really what traditionally is known as the soft skills, creativity, collaboration, learning, are the ones that really are going to be the predictive of success for future potential. So we're seeing from an assessment perspective is there's a higher lens on looking at talent from a future potential perspective versus the skills that they have today. So that's what I wanted to add from what Rajan had said.
Hey, this is Yulia.
Great,
Thanks, Grace. Thanks, Rajan. Maybe adding a bit of another perspective as well. What I saw from attending conferences, talking to colleagues in different companies, is that we start to understand where and how assessment can help us, and we understand that getting that 360 view of a person is really important. I still feel on a bit of a negative side that we focus too much still on recruitment and selection, and we bring more objectivity there, but not so much when we focus on internal candidates and on succession planning, where we still go on subjective measures. I feel that there's still a lack in fully using the findings that we have in recruitment, in talent acquisition, into development. We seem to be missing a year out and not really targeting development from the first moment. And but I really feel, and I think Grace is supporting me in this, that we are definitely going towards automation. Right now, it's more towards administration and using the tools online and using data like this. But I can see a future quite quick when machines get better than humans at analyzing and profiling, especially if we talk about those cognitive abilities. And yeah, at some point with data, with the build-up of algorithms and cleaning them and making sure they're correct, I can see how machines can be better than us, less biased, bringing in diversity, bringing in inclusion. Of course, we still need to work on the ethics. We still need to avoid the pitfalls. We still need a very good collaborations between vendors and companies, but I can see a future where this is definitely possible.
Great, thanks so much. And I think already we've got quite a lot of things to think about in terms of looking forward. I think that, you know, each of you have mentioned the issue around skills shortage, the soft skills in particular that we need to look at. And I think also this opportunity for assessment to be a key enabling role. I think the 360 view Julia mentioned, also in terms of looking at those skills as they evolve, but also Rajan mentioned the need for specialized, customized based assessments. Yeah. So really looking at that, keeping it human centric, and then really leveraging the HR investments in technology. So thanks again. Thanks to all of you in terms of where we, and finally, I think this need to connect, and I think you've all touched on that, applying what we know in external assessment to internal assessment. I think that's really important. Maybe if we go a little bit deeper now. So as this market is evolving, as the requirements are evolving, yeah, what do you see as challenges, opportunities, differences? And in particular, you know, when we look at future skills, which you've each looked at, mentioned, you know, where do you see assessment going in terms of its ability to predict performance?
Yeah, so Tara, this is Julia. I can start with that if you're okay with it.
Thanks, Julia. Great.
So talking about challenges and opportunities, I think the big part relates to this new generation of assessments and new generation of psychometrics. And just to start with a base there is a big debate right now in the psychology and scientific world that actually these kind of assessments are quite differently built than the old classical self-assessments, which were item-based. And the first thing, and now there's a big challenge there, and there are developments proposed on how to actually measure validity, reliability in those, because they are different. We have way more data. So that's the first big challenge that the whole industry is facing, to really develop guidelines which will help implement this new generation psychometrics, to really understand how they work and how they can help a company. And then if we continue on the challenges, it's really creating the right algorithms, understanding what they have behind them, getting the right measures in place, right? From a company perspective, understanding what each of them measure and how they relate to job performance, what is behind them, right? We really need to understand, hey, are they ethical? Do they have bias introduced? How can we take that out of it? And then once that is done, I think there's a big and huge challenge still in implementing and adopting. It's very hard to change an assessment or to even to implement assessment, to teach the entire organization, to make them aware of how they're used, how to interpret, how to use the data, how different traits relate to one another, how different traits relate to development, right? where we should invest, where you should cut your losses, and just be a part with that person. How to make decisions based on these assessments. And then, of course, there are challenges in understanding how the different traits influence each other and how they build on each other, right? And as I stated before, really creating that partnership. There's still a gap. We still are companies versus vendors, right? Hey, let me just try this vendor out, and I'm not really trusting, and I'm not sure what's behind. But I think we need to join forces, because these new vendors with the new generation psychometrics, they build on our data. They can only get better with our data. So we need to build that partnership. So there's a huge opportunity there to build a partnership. It's still the wild, wild west. So I think testing, piloting is an opportunity that we can all go to. So what I do every day is just demo with all of the companies that are on the market, just to understand how they work and what they do. I think there's a huge opportunity, and it needs to start now, to really collect and analyze data, because without data, you cannot make any changes. You don't understand the company. You can already start automating parts of the assessments, right? You can already start looking at reducing bias and increasing diversity. Very important, building on what Rajan said, because we need to upskill and reskill. Companies, even like Pymetrics, they can help getting to know the workforce in depth, not just as a subjective measure, not as the 9-box type of evaluations or the CV-based evaluation or just a job-based evaluation, but really get to know the workforce in depth and what kind of skills they still need and how you can build them. That's a really huge opportunity when you deploy such new psychometrics, right? Now, so yeah, guys, if you can add on opportunities, definitely build on differences. I was thinking that they come from 3 different perspectives. There's a difference in how countries and regions look at assessments. There's a difference in how different companies can afford and use assessments. And there's a difference in the assessments themselves, right? There's research done by CAT-E with about 3,000 participants all over the world. And then if you look at what they have done, they pretty much show that, for example, assessment and development centers, they are very much used in Norway, Sweden, France, Spain, whereas psychometrics are mostly used in China, UK, and Ireland, right? So there's a difference in the regions. There's a difference on how we base selection decisions on competencies. Europe is towards 90% on competencies, whereas China towards 30%, they rely on something else more. If companies feel that these are defendable in court or not, it's the companies in Europe feel that they are more defendable in court, the psychometrics versus other regions. If we look at companies, the kind of money we have, the kind of finances we have, of course, if you can put the money in and you can test and pilot more of the assessments, run them in parallel, of course, you can collect data, you can make the best decisions for yourself. But companies that don't have that, it's a bit more difficult, right? Those who are more prone to risk and experimenting, they can gain more in the future. I think the thing is that we need to try, we need to pilot, right? And then in assessments themselves, yeah, they can range from anywhere from classical administered on PC on-site to online to predictive, and even personality profiles online, right? Like the kind we've seen with Facebook and so on.
Great. Thanks, Yulia. Grace, Rajan, do you want to add to that? Thank you.
Thank you, Yulia. You've definitely covered a breadth of the challenges and the opportunities. What I'd like to continue on is the opportunities from a point of view that, to me, the technologies that are available today, like Pymetrics, allows you to have that, what we call the universal data. I think both Yulia and Rajan spoke about, there's a different type of selection process or selection things that are used from a talent acquisition. Technology now, like Pymetrics, allows you to basically use that same data to the same selection process that you could have in internal mobility. And I think, Rajan, you mentioned that today, internal selection is pretty much instincts driven versus insights driven. And to us is the technology is here. And if you identify, the right and select the right technology, you can achieve both. And to me, that's the other opportunity, and at the same time, it's a challenge. We spoke about briefly around, HR, or the talent function, is not traditionally a technology buyer. But if any of you, go into Google and do an infographic of HR technology, there's hundreds and hundreds of them. And so when, vendors are saying we're AI based or we can do predictive, I can just imagine that it's starting to sound the same to somebody who is in the HR or talent function professional. And so the questions that Eula have outlined is really important, because regardless of how innovative the technology is, reliability and validity is still critical. So the importance of partnering with your org psychology, with your CIO in HR, to me is really what HR is going to have to think about as far as embracing these. The second piece that I would add is, because there's just so many technologies out there that you could try, is just be very clear on what is it that you're trying to measure. So, we've all heard of FOMO, fear of missing out. At the end of the day, potentially run the risk of trialing all these technologies and you're measuring the exact same competencies, the exact same skills, as far as 5 others that you've actually deployed. And so later on, there's an assessment matrix that, as a sample that we usually guide our clients, say, depending on what you're trying to measure, there might be different ways to achieve, the things that is important, so that there is predictability. And if performance is one of them, there's different types of performance measures as well. And so there's different technologies, and sometimes it's not even a technology that you would need for that. And so again, we'll share that a little bit later on. Rajan, is there anything that you wanted to add?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Yulia and Grace. So I will just add 2 things, one opportunity and one challenge. So let me go to the challenge first. If I have to look at the Asia Pacific context, you have many startups, and even you have large digital giants. And if you take an organization like MasterCard, our business cycles are pretty long. But in order for us to actually be able to be agile and compete with some of these digital giants, or even for that matter, we actually see them as partners. We want to actually make sure that we're able to help them with their payment needs. With assessments, I think it's about how do we actually define some of those success measures and the predicted outcomes, and making sure that we are actually staying agile through the process.
Yes.
Because the long cycles of having annual objectives or having multi-year plans are slowly going out of the way, and they are no more kind of relevant in today's world. How do we actually stay agile, and how can we use assessment, but at the same time making sure that it's, while having to be agile, is going to be a challenge. Quickly kind of redefining or kind of changing some of those measures and making sure that it's relevant. From an opportunity perspective, I see how we can leverage on assessments to being able to try and achieve the balance in terms of hiring some really good talent with critical skills who can actually help us succeed in new areas, and at the same time making sure that we are developing our internal talent. I think assessments can help us to be able to achieve that balance. At the same time, also making sure that the privacy requirements are managed. So I would say that's from the opportunities perspective. Thank you.
Thanks so much to each of you. And I think, again, you've touched on a lot there in terms of staying agile and also developing those internal talents. But I think also the points around sort of transparency, the need for transparency going forward as we look at sort of the opportunities, because it is a demand across lots of things, and what are you trying to measure in terms of the technology. Maybe if we go a bit deeper into technology, and it's also interesting because, Grace, you were talking about the need for HR to work with the CIO, with different people in the organization with assessment. It also speaks to sort of capabilities in HR that they need to be developed, but particularly in talent acquisition, several people would see it as the new frontier because it's seen as a massive area of opportunity, talent acquisition. But for some people, it feels like the Wild West. How do I know? So it would be interesting, Grace, to see what you see as latest trends and technology sort of driving the evolution of assessment. And then, when looking at technology, what should companies be asking vendors? Where is this going? So that, fear of missing out you touched on. So thanks a lot for sort of talking us through some of the issues in this space.
Sure. So let me answer the the first part when it comes to technology and from an assessment perspective, because again, as Rajan said, there's an opportunity to have that same approach to talent acquisition, and how do you make that data-driven, scalable way from an internal talent selection perspective. If you look at, again, it's because roles are changing so fast. From an internal talent selection perspective, and the demographics that are in the workplace today, it's really important for the talent acquisition team and the talent management team to work together, because it's no longer just about working within one's discipline. So just because you've landed in sales, it doesn't mean that it's about going up the corporate ladder in sales. What a lot of the workforce that are wanting today is really more varied experiences. So how do you provide the transparency of what is the opportunity for that particular talent, whether that is a person that you're trying to bring into the organization, and giving them visibility of potential future career opportunities, not necessarily specific to a job, but potential functional areas that they can go to based on what is being viewed on what their strengths are, in which they could be successful not only in the role that they have today, but also in the future. And the same thing goes as far as the internal selection. As I said, is with us is we take a custom model or success model approach. We believe that even from within the same industry, each company is unique. And each role in the company is unique. And so for hiring managers to pigeonhole a talent, because again, it's about that unconscious bias, is for a talent acquisition manager to actually, to have a data-driven way of saying, but this data shows that, with some level of reskilling, they could actually be successful in that other role. And by having that transparency, whether it's a talent heat map or otherwise, I think it provides that, it's a good candidate experience, because there is a transparency of where can I go beyond, the discipline that I have. But also from a company perspective, is you are supporting the requirements for a self-directed learning and self-directed career pathing that the workforce actually wants today.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Grace. And if I look at some of the digital opportunities that we have, I would kind of again highlight two things. So the first one is, I think, the gamification piece. I think it's around how do you make sure that you leverage that for the right audience, and you're actually customizing it so that it actually helps us to achieve those end outcomes. That's a clear opportunity. The second one, if I actually take an example of a very senior general management role, if I say country manager, going back to a decade, and what are the expectations of country managers now, it's completely changed. Whereas before it was very relationship driven, socially managing relationships, to where I think today our general managers are expected to actually be very, very up to speed on public policy, engaging governments and regulators, not just as probably people that we have to do kind of work with, but it's more around how do we see them as partners or customers. In that regard, again, assessing the right talent, and also preparing potential country managers for the actual role when they get in. I think assessments have a huge role to play, and we have close to like 80 or 90 country managers across the globe, and they're all dispersed. How do we actually, again, leverage the digital technology that we have from an assessment perspective, and making sure that we are providing that development opportunities across the board, and making sure that these critical roles and the individuals who are there actually are fully capable in order to be successful today, and also making sure that they are actually preparing the market for future growth as well. Thank you.
And just, I think to add on that.
To add in anything on that?
Yeah, I was thinking that one other trend that I've seen, and I think it will kind of drive talent assessment and employee centricity or candidate centricity, however you want to call it, is the start of blockchain and platforms who use blockchain for various assessments, in the sense that what they say is that they will provide the candidate or the employee with total control on their assessments. So they would choose the kind of assessments that maybe the industry is running. They would run them, but then instead of running an assessment for A company, another assessment for B company, another assessment for C company, and getting all sorts of replies and feedback, they would be able to control how they are being assessed. They would be able to control their data and then share it at their own volition with the companies, and that will bring more employee centricity for sure. And I think what we are trying to do, in a sense, is to replace the flawed human, right? We are flawed, we are biased, and it's just the reality of how our brains work. There's not a lot to do about it, but ask ourselves questions, which can be biased as well. So at some point we will need to have that data. We will need to build those algorithms which are free of bias and use this kind of platforms and use technology. So I think in terms of opportunity, again, is test, pilot, collect data, keep an open eye, really understand what's happening there, keep an eye on research, and pretty much, I think, make decisions which are good for the company, but also for the person and for the society in general, right? In how we share data and all of that about our employees and about our candidates.
Thanks to all of you. I think you've each raised topics that we could discuss for quite a long time. I think that this idea of people controlling their assessments is very interesting, but at the same time we hear that companies are different, so you are adapting the assessment. So there is a middle line, using the gamification piece, really tracking internal talent and using assessment to help people get ready for those future roles. But this transparency theme, I think, in terms of future career opportunities, keeps coming through. Julia, we had, Grace. It might just help if we touched on what you raised earlier. Sort of what are the questions that people should be asking vendors, and we have more detail on that in the attached gap. But maybe Grace, you might touch on that just to sort of help people from a high level, and then they can go into more detail later. Sure. Thanks, Grace.
Sure. Thank you, Tara. There's 4 or 5 simple questions that the company should be asking their vendors. And as I said earlier, is regardless of how innovative the technology is, reliability and validity is just as important. And so really partner with your org psychologist to see, does the science stack up? What are the specific data points that are used to build the algorithm? And do you actually understand when that, what's the input and what happens inside that algorithm that causes that output? And the vendor should be able to, to explain that to you. Ask them as far as how are you building and maintaining that algorithm? So again, is how did you come up with that, with the sample size? So for us, is the way we work with clients is really try to understand what is the problem that you're trying to solve for. So it's a known fact, as an example, here in the region, that grads has one of the highest attrition after 12 months or after 2 years. So to us is we work closely with our clients to really understand. Is it attrition then that we're trying to solve for? So those are how we would work on sample sizes. Who has been successful in role for over 2 years? And at the end of the day, the technology that is here today allows you to have that data-driven way of how do we actually measure that, and what are the traits that that comprises that sample size. The third piece is, Julia, you've kind of said that. A number of times during the session now, is you definitely need to ask the question is, how do they mitigate bias and support diversity? Because to me, it's one of the things that I love about what technology offers today is it doesn't have to be biased. It's, as you said, Yulia, it's people are the ones that are biased. It's actually not the technology. And so it's really important to understand, before that algorithm or that custom model goes live is, how is that debiased? Once it goes live, how is that tested for fairness? And how often is that model refreshed? The fourth piece is that, again, really important for companies to ask their vendors is, you mentioned success metrics, because there's different kinds of success metrics, ones that you could potentially not see for another 12 months or 2 years, like if you're trying to solve for attrition. But there are some success metrics that can be identified within 3 months or 6 months or less. And it's a matter of sitting down with that, with that vendor to understand, how can they support you in calculating, evaluating what that success metrics look like, whether that is from a HR or TA specific or an actual business impact. And so the ROI studies and predictive validity, and is that included in the service that the vendor provides, or are those additional costs? Because again, each vendor is different. And Yulia, the fourth piece is really about change management. Again, this is a technology, but the impact is to the people. And so this still needs to be human-centered. So, how are you helping your employees, whether it's in HR or the hiring managers, understand, what is different by implementing this technology, and what are the opportunities in doing so? So I can't emphasize enough about change management. So those would be the 5 things that I would ask, any vendor today, and they should be able to explain it to you in the level of detail that you need.
Great. Thanks, Grace. We have a question from Christian Rubical, who's come in to sort of ask us, what is your view on the opportunity that blockchain can make to make assessments more candidate-centric?
So I think the centricity that they speak about, and this is really not even beta testing, this is alpha testing. I just moved to Amsterdam, so this is a quite big thing here, and they are developing quite interesting technologies in blockchain, not necessarily Amsterdam, but Rotterdam. But they participate in a lot of meetups, so the talk is quite big about blockchain here, and especially in HR, because they see an opportunity, right? And the way they see it, and then they feel that they can make it more person-centric, whether that's a candidate, employee, or personally, is providing that person the control of their data, right? So the data will not be used by anyone. You would have access. It would be like locked with a key, and you decide who to share it with, and for how long to share it with, right? So it's a sort of I own my data and I share it with whoever I want. That's the way they see it right now.
Now, what's the timeline on that? If you say it's at alpha testing, not even beta.
So the why I say it's alpha testing is that they are now experimenting with it, right? And they're trying to see how it works. They can definitely see it working because this is what blockchain does, right? It provides that control and that of data. But at the same time, the data is unmodifiable because, right, it's shared and it's stored on various other supports, right? So it's very, very hard to modify. It's very, very hard to forge. You will always have your data.
Yeah.
But they're thinking about it. I've not heard yet of a platform that does it. There are platforms right now that they use for talent acquisition, but more for recruitment, right? And for all of this gig economy, those kind of platforms they've already started to share and develop, and those are already in beta testing. And so they're actually live. You can even look at them, like companies called Chronobank, if you want to have a look. But that's mostly for recruitment, for this gig kind of economy, right? But for this is mostly in thinking mode of how can they do to provide that control to the person. Like you do with DNA testing as well, right? I mean, DNA testing, it's the same.
Yeah.
Any kind of biometric testing, if it's shared with everyone, then you do have a risk of misuse of the data.
Yes, of course. Grace, Rajan, any add-ins on that to Christian's question?
No, because haven't kind of specifically, I'm kind of familiar with blockchain from a business perspective, and where are some of the use cases that we are actually doing. We have our own private blockchain, but nothing much to add, nothing more to add to what Julia has already shared.
As
Yeah.
I develop,
Okay,
I can share that, Tara, with you, and you can share with everyone else.
Sure. So a watching eye, Christian. Not yet, but it's a very interesting. Again, I suppose the dynamic in terms of who controls information, etc. We touched earlier also in terms of making assessment efficient, and you know you have a sample assessment matrix, Grace, that sort of illustrates a little bit in terms of what people can be doing to streamline, you know, to avoid duplication. Maybe you can talk to that a little bit. Is that okay?
Sure. I think that's on the next slide that
Yeah.
that you're about to show, Tara. So if you can go to that.
I'm clicking on it now.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is really a sample assessment matrix that our org psychologists in the regions use. Okay, that slide is no longer showing.
I know.
This particular one is.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's showing again. This particular one is specific to recruitment. As I mentioned earlier, some companies do a lot of pilots, do have a number of assessments, traditional and otherwise. But you end up doing is basically assessing similar things, which again, it's not efficient from a talent function perspective. So this just gives you a categorization and a sample of what you can, how you need to take a step back and think about what is the best way to, assess a candidate based on the things that you want to, assess them on. And so, does it make sense for, a recruiter to assess that in person versus a gamified technology such as Prometrics? Or is it a video interview, or is it the actual hiring manager? And what you see there are categories that gives you the ticks in the box. And I highly recommend this, because then as you can take a step back to say, okay, what are the gaps? So that when you are having a conversation with that vendor, you know exactly where they start and where they finish, and what will be the most logical way for you to assess that. And then, you can make it repeatable and scalable, and make it part of your standardized process. What are your thoughts, Rajan?
So I think that's key in terms of being able to actually understand what the vendor can do. And if we don't have the follow-up next to that, then what happens is the overall impact gets diluted. And making sure that whoever is going to be the end users from the organization, they actually understand the purpose and the objectives and their role in it. Because again, that will impact the success and the outcome. So I would say, yes, having this matrix really would help us to evaluate and making sure that we're putting the necessary kind of, I would say, actions internally or the steps internally or the due diligence that happens in order to make sure that we get the best of it.
And you're setting and managing expectations
Yes.
as well, and what's required from the business.
Absolutely.
Plus, you get the focus, and I think everyone understands what they need to measure and when. Because otherwise, what we tend to do, especially in recruitment, we tend to overlap assessments, right? Asking the same question to the poor candidate over and over again. And then I think this links back to what we were talking about, questions to ask to vendors. I think even before you go to a vendor, you need to understand what are you aiming for? What do you try to measure? What do you want? How do you want to use that measure? How do you look at the data? How do you interpret it? What do you do with the analysis afterwards, right? And then creating that link to development as well. So using this kind of assessment matrix, and I tend to use them all the time because they are really, really good and really focused, is really, really critical to understand what you're doing and focusing everyone on what they need to do and playing their part.
Thanks so much, Julia. Thank you. Are there any particular digital pilots that you'd like to just highlight before we move on? or examples?
Yeah, well, I'm working now on HireView, right? They have an AI tool. Now I'm not fully bought on it, right? Because I'm not. Yeah, it's still a debate on how all the analysis is done. But I do believe this will increase. So we are trying to understand how it works. That's the pilot. Unfortunately, Grace, we were not, because our company is smaller and we have a huge variety of jobs. I could not go for Pymetrics. This was mostly for financial reasons because I really like what you do, guys. But yeah, so it's mostly in that area. And otherwise, it really depends on countries. In some, I really had to stay very classical, right? And it depends on the language of the assessments and everything else. So yeah.
Interesting. Thanks, Julia.
And just to
Grace.
And just to
Rajan.
add, yes, thank you, Ryan. So just to add, I think one with Pymetrics, I think we've actually started working with them in US already, and now we are looking to actually expand the usage of Pymetric assessments for our campus hiring across the globe. And today, the campus hiring is really big outside the US. Before we used to be small. If I look at the other pilot that I want to talk about, when we compare to large technology organizations who are primarily services, software services organization, or you take some of the large financial services organization, they hire in thousands, but we are still a very efficient and a lean organization. Our campus hiring numbers are probably touching that 500, 600 mark across the globe on an annual basis. We are looking at how can we carve out a niche. And if I have to talk about one example, in China, it's such a huge market. And we have many companies who actually are well established from a campus hiring perspective. And now we are looking to expand in that market. And China is a very, very critical market for us. We have actually partnered with 2 external partners, one to leverage the WeChat platform, and the other actually to drive a digital EVP campaign to kind of say what can MasterCard offer to actually prospect campus hires in China in terms of an international work culture, being able to actually come in and have a global career, having the opportunity to actually interact seamlessly across the globe and actually learn and grow faster, and driving that because China is such a huge market, using that digital platform to be able to drive our EVP better. So we've had some very, very good success initially. It's really helped us, and we hope to actually expand that across Asia as well, probably this year and next year.
That's great.
Very cool.
The thing that I would add to that is, from a Pymetrics perspective, campus is one of the more common scenarios, as well as early career and experience hire. But to us, it's the thing that I would add to the opportunity from a digital pilot perspective is really kind of putting into reality that talent can come from anywhere. So whether it's companies like Unilever or Accenture or JP Morgan Chase or DBS or ANZ, Rio and VHP, they all have their goals around diversity, and it's not just gender diversity. And what they want to be able to do is really cast a wide net. So it's no longer about just going to the same companies that recruiters used to go to, or the same schools that the companies used to go to. With social and the multi-channel platform that's available out there, as companies are able, with a strong employer, like a strong EVP, are able to cast a wide net. And by default then is where Pymetrics comes in, is really then look at, who are the highly recommended or recommended candidates that we know would be predictively successful for a particular role within MasterCard. And we're doing that, as I mentioned, with companies that are in the resourcing space with great success in achieving their diversity goals, but also their business performance, and talent acquisition goals. I like hearing verbatims from retailers where they have this idea of who they thought would be their store managers, and it comes out to be very, very different. And so it's from a set of committed talent that normally they wouldn't consider in a traditional CV screen type of a recruitment process. And the one that is the one that we're quite proud of is with Dandelion Project, which is with DXC Technology in Australia. And so this is really this is talking about that in universities today, there's a certain percentage of people that are actually in the autism spectrum. Actually, in Australia, 26% of students that are in the STEM program are in that spectrum. And so, but these are talented people that will not pass in a traditional recruitment process. And so by working with the Dandelion program, we're able to use biometrics as a way to screen them into the program. And again, the types of roles they're consistently being placed on are cybersecurity, data science, and software engineering. And we're working closely, with the Dandelion team to see how we can expand that, to other roles. So those are just examples of, the different types of pilots that we're doing. But I thought I'd elevate the ones that are quite unique.
Thanks
I think
so much.
I think this ties into something we didn't yet discuss, but you have the research on the slides that Tara is going to share, that actually just looking at job experience in terms of years, job experience doesn't really predict performance or job-related learning, right? You have other measures like general mental agility or interviews or job knowledge tests or other measures that would predict performance more, whereas the actual experience, it's really not a good predictor. Age is really not a predictor at all, right? So you have all of this, question marks in the field, which can be really, really covered by technology, because right now we are looking more at CVs and experience rather than anything else.
Okay.
Which, if you look at the research, is not so relevant.
Well, can I just jump in, Yulia, because I'm very conscious of time. And I think, again, that's another topic we could drill down on. If you look on your deck a few slides back, we provided some links that Yulia mentioned, so you can really go into that research in more detail if you wish. It's very interesting. There are a couple of other aspects that I think we wanted to touch on. One is really this centricity, this privacy, this ethical treatment of data. We're talking about transparency, and at the same time, people want to feel that their data is handled fairly, and at the same time, we've talked a lot about technology, but this human, it's the relationships that people build through the assessment process, because that needs to be part of the experience. So could I ask you maybe just quickly to sort of comment on what you see are the issues that companies need to address in trying to ensure that data is treated fairly and that we maintain that human touch as we go through talent assessment? Rajan, maybe if we could start with you on that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tara. So three main points around that. The first one is around the inclusive culture is non-negotiable. So making sure that we're getting all the right stakeholders involved, and we are being very, very thoughtful about, when you're looking at assessments, why, where, when, and how we're using it. And doing that at the early stages is very critical. The second one, I think when it comes to assessments, we have to make sure that it's very focused on development, and we are actually including that in the communication and being very transparent about it upfront. And again, staying true to that as we go through that process. And the third one is, I talked about agility before, but I think making sure that we are going ahead with smaller pilots, learning from them, and making sure that we're able to improvise as we go along. So I would say those three things as key from an employee centricity perspective.
From a, so to me, there's, I guess there's two approaches or how we think about it from a biometrics perspective. So one is making sure that there are frameworks or guidelines that companies and vendors, can follow. Mm-hmm. And this is where, it's starting now. We're seeing more and more frameworks come out, at a country level and at a regional level. So in Singapore alone, the Singapore government has an AI ethics committee, and they've come out with their AI framework. How companies need to use that from from a workforce perspective, the Australian Human Rights Commission is doing the exact same thing. So I think there is a responsibility for industry and government to work together to make sure that, as you called out, is the fairness and the privacy and is complied to. From a Prometrics perspective, we are compliant with the US EEOC's uniform guidelines on employee selection procedure. So that is a very common thing. When it comes to, again, fairness, accountability, and transparency, I mean, Rajan, you covered that in making sure that, it is a very inclusive process and that you do that from the very beginning. To me, as I just go back to, again, is the key things that I asked, the things that you should really be asking, your vendors as you're evaluating them, especially around, how are they supporting diversity? And how are they making sure that that algorithm, is debiased?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yulia, any very quick thing to comment on this?
I think as part of companies, we need to understand and remember that candidates and employees generally know even less than we do about these assessments. So of course they are afraid that we make decisions on that. So how do we explain that? How do we become transparent? How do we provide them with the right feedback so they can go home and work on the items that they need to work on and develop? How do we provide them with an opportunity to come back to us, right? Because if you give them time, 6 months, a year, 2 years, they might develop and they might come to the level that you want them to. So how do we build that in our processes? And just remember that they are pretty much more fearful. And I was looking at some research lately, and scientists tend to look at this in a holistic way. So not only what you do with the assessment, but how do you use it afterwards, and how do you make sure that, for example, after you run an assessment internally, you take care not only about the people that have really high scores and can learn and develop, but those who are excluded maybe from talent management programs or from high-pot programs. How do you give them the opportunity then to learn and develop, even if they do it at a slower pace, right? So I think there's a lot of questions that we need to ask ourselves when we put in place any kind of metric, right? How do we visualize the talent? How do we identify them? How do we design a talent program? And how do we manage it and then evaluate the program?
Thanks so much. Can I ask each of you, if you can, to highlight maybe 3 actions that would be interesting to take away in terms of if you're in your company and you're saying, okay, what should I be doing now to make sure I'm aligning myself in terms of the reskilling, future skilling of my organization, I'm availing of technology opportunities, I have my business.
Am I the only one who's not hearing Tara anymore?
No, I think
she got cut off.
Yeah, but I think we can. So they lost the audio, not just Tara.
Okay.
So I think is it 3 points?
Yes, 3 key takeaways. So probably I can go first. So I think the key is making sure that we're not actually simply just jumping onto the bandwagon, actually doing all the latest trends, but having absolute clarity on why, when, and where, and how we're going to use the assessments. I think that's a key thing. The second one is around ensuring that there's complete transparency and upfront communication to employees or probably external candidates around how that assessment is going to be used, information is going to be used. That's, I think, key. The third one is, how do you just use this as one of the levers and complement with, probably if you look at it from an internal talent development perspective, in addition to assessments, how are you going to provide the right exposure and the right critical experiences internally for people to actually achieve that goal of reskilling and upskilling themselves? So I would say those 3 are the key call-outs.
I would just add to Raja, because I mean those are the same call-outs, but to me it's a great opportunity. So HR and the talent function is being invited at the table to advise leadership on what the business needs, not just for today, but in the future. And so to me is the key takeaway is if if technology
Hi.
transformation is being introduced in your area, if you're in HR or the talent function, embrace it and really think about what the opportunities for you to, whether it's automation so that you're not doing the repetitive task, but technology is there to augment your capability. So one is do not be afraid and embrace technology. Second piece is about, as Rajan said, I can't emphasize clarity on what is it that you're trying to assess. And then, the 5 things that, that you should be asking vendors. And again, there's a slide on it. And, again, this session is recorded because that's really, really important to make sure that you know exactly what the vendor offers, how they're going to support what you need, how are they going to measure success. So you bought them for a reason. The assessment, the next generation of assessment allows you to have that closed loop around performance predictability that traditional assessments would have been hard to do. And the third piece is automation and AI is a secret weapon for HR to from a human-centric approach to to employee and candidate centricity.
Can you hear me? I think we're actually out of time, Julia. My apologies. Maybe we can type in. Yeah.
No worries.
I'd like to thank the 3 of you for engaging in a very dynamic conversation. The last of our deck here shows you upcoming webcasts, related research, and then also our peer networks that we engage in across the regions. And we often have conversations like these. So if you find that interesting, please do connect. As we mentioned at the beginning, if you can please complete the evaluation, that would be great. In the deck, if you download it, there is some more information in terms of the workforce and also more details, particularly on the information that Grace provided, the Pymetrics, more details on the questions that you should be asking vendors, etc. I'd like to thank everybody today for the webcast, in particular Julia, Rajan, and Grace. Thank you so much and have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Thanks,
bye.
Thanks so much. Thank you.